It's not luck. It's not some secret formula. It's intention applied over time. See, we often overestimate what we can do in a day and underestimate what we can do in 90. But 3 months, 90 days of focused, committed effort done with the right purpose, that can change everything. Not because the goal is magical, but because you become someone new in the process. Change isn't about waking up one day and becoming a completely different person. It's about showing up every day with the decision to live a little more in alignment with who you want to be. Not perfect, just present, consistent, willing. Imagine if for the next 3 months you woke up every day and asked yourself one question: what would the future version of me do today? Then you actually did it. Not flawlessly, but faithfully. You drank the water. You wrote the page. You made the call. You took the walk. You said no to the old version of you and yes to the new one, over and over again. And here's what happens when you do something like that. The results might be invisible at first. You might even feel like nothing's changing, but 3 weeks in, your mind starts to shift. 6 weeks in, people notice. By the time you hit 90 days, you're not just working on a goal anymore. You've built a foundation. You built you. And that's the whole point. The life you want isn't found in some far-off destination. It's built through the person you're willing to become right now. And if you give just 3 months to becoming that person, you won't recognize your life by the end of it. That question sounds simple, almost cliche, but if you really stop and let it linger for a moment, then if you let it sit in the quiet space between one breath and the next, it starts to echo deeper than most are willing to go. The truth is, most people don't wake up with purpose. They wake up with obligation, with noise, with a to-do list that begins before their feet even hit the ground. And while that might carry them through the day, it won't carry them through life. So let me ask you again, not as a rhetorical statement, but as a challenge. Why do you wake up? Because here's what I know. When you have a clear why, discipline is no longer a punishment. It becomes an act of alignment. When you know what your life is for, the hard work, the early mornings, the sacrifices, they don't feel like burdens, they feel like stepping stones. And that's what changes people. We're told all the time that we should work hard, but hard work without direction becomes exhaustion, it becomes burnout. We get good at being busy and terrible at being fulfilled. We chase productivity like it's the goal, forgetting that productivity is only valuable if it's moving us towards something meaningful. Working hard for 90 days doesn't change your life just because you exerted more energy. It changes your life because it gives you the chance to align your effort with something bigger than yourself, something that matters to you, something you believe in. But most people never slow down long enough to figure that part out. They set goals because someone told them to. Lose weight, make more money, start a business, learn a skill. And while none of those are wrong, they become empty if they're not rooted in something deeper. See, when we begin with what we want to do or how we plan to do it, we get caught in strategy without purpose. That's why so many people quit 2 weeks in. It's not that they're lazy. It's that they're unclear. Their work lacks meaning, so their motivation doesn't last. But when we begin with why, when we start by identifying the deeper reason behind our actions, everything else follows. Think about it. If your goal is to wake up at 5 a.m. every day to go to the gym, and your why is just to look good at the beach, you might make it a few weeks, but if your why is to become a present, energized parent who has the stamina to chase their kids around the yard for years to come, suddenly that early alarm has a pulse. It beats with meaning. It's not just a habit, it's a promise. Purpose breathes life into routine. And it's not just about self-improvement, it's about identity. When we know our why, we don't just do different things, we become someone different, someone intentional, someone who doesn't let the noise of the world drown out the signal of their own life. Because here's the thing, there will always be noise. The world is full of distractions dressed up as opportunities. It will constantly ask for your attention, your energy, your time. If you're not anchored to something deeper, you'll drift. You'll say yes to things you don't believe in. You'll follow paths that were never meant for you. You'll trade long-term fulfillment for short-term approval. But when you have a reason, when your life is guided by a clear internal compass, you don't chase everything that glitters. You start to say no, not because you're closed off, but because you're focused. You're not trying to do everything, you're trying to do what matters. That kind of clarity is rare, but it's available to anyone who's willing to ask hard questions, anyone willing to sit in stillness and be honest. Because purpose isn't discovered in a rush, it's revealed in reflection. So what does this have to do with changing your life in 3 months? Everything. Because if you decide to dedicate the next 90 days to something meaningful, the work itself becomes a catalyst. It's not just what you do in those 3 months, it's who you become. And that transformation doesn't start with a plan. It starts with a reason. The mistake most people make is thinking that change is external, that it lives in the number on a scale or the size of a paycheck or the followers on a screen. But real change, the kind that actually matters, begins internally. It starts with the shift from what should I do to why does this matter to me? That's where the power is. Because once you know your why, your path becomes clearer. Your energy becomes focused, your habits align, and your life begins to organize itself around something real, not something reactive. You stop chasing every new trend. You stop comparing your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20. You stop questioning your worth based on whether someone likes your photo or applauds your progress. You realize you're not here to impress people. You're here to express purpose. And in that place, with that kind of clarity, 90 days isn't just a quarter of a year, it's the start of a new trajectory. It's where momentum begins. And momentum, once started, has a funny way of compounding, especially when it's fueled by meaning. So if you want to change your life, don't just start with a to-do list. Start with a why list. Ask yourself, why do I want to change? What is this really about? Who do I want to become? And who might I become if I stay the same? Don't chase discipline for its own sake. Chase the reason that makes discipline worth it. Because when you find that, you unlock something most people never touch. The ability to endure, to persevere, to show up even when it's hard. Because it's not about the pain, it's about the purpose behind the pain. 3 months of hard work won't change your life because you got stronger or smarter. It will change your life because you finally aligned your effort with your essence. You worked not just to improve, but to become. And becoming, that's where transformation lives. We tend to think of transformation as something massive, almost mythical, a total reinvention of self, a complete overhaul of life. The kind of change that takes years of struggle, sacrifice, and maybe even a little bit of luck. That's the story we're sold, that big change demands big time. And so when we look at where we are versus where we want to be, the distance feels overwhelming. We don't even start. Not because we're incapable, but because the mountain just looks too tall. But what if it wasn't? What if the life you want isn't as far as you think? What if change doesn't actually take years? What if it takes 90 days, 3 months? That's it, not forever, not a lifetime, just a short season of your life lived with focus, intention, and commitment that's enough to change the direction of your future. It's not because time itself is magic, it's because time, when paired with clarity and consistency, becomes exponential. Think about the seasons. 3 months is enough time to go from winter to spring. Enough time for something dead to bloom again, for something buried to grow roots, for something quiet to become alive. Nature doesn't force it, it just happens. Rhythmically, steadily, faithfully. And if the natural world can change in 3 months, why do we believe we can't? See, the problem isn't time. The problem is how we use it. Most people drift through 90 days and barely remember them. A blur of work, errands, distractions, and the usual scroll through someone else's highlight reel. We wait for motivation to hit, for conditions to be perfect, for the right time to finally show up and make us move. But we forget that time doesn't wait. And it doesn't care whether you use it or waste it. It just keeps moving. So the question isn't whether 90 days is enough to change your life. The question is, will you actually give yourself to those 90 days? Because here's what happens when you do. Day 1 feels exciting. You've made a decision, a commitment. You're ready, you've got energy, and maybe even a new journal. You start writing things down, feeling inspired. You tell yourself, this time, I mean it. And you do. But day 10 feels different. It's not exciting anymore. It's work. The motivation that showed up so loudly on day 1 is now a whisper, or maybe even gone altogether. And that's where most people stop. They mistake excitement for commitment. But change was never about feeling good. It's about showing up when you don't. When you push past that dip, when you do the right thing, even when it feels dull, even when no one's watching, even when progress is invisible, that's when something begins to shift. Not outside, inside. You start trusting yourself again. And that trust is everything. Most people don't lack ability. They lack belief in themselves, in the process, in the idea that their effort is actually doing something. But 90 days of consistency proves otherwise. It proves that you can follow through, that you're capable of building momentum, that change isn't reserved for the lucky or the chosen. It's available to anyone who chooses to persist. Think about how much life we waste waiting. We wait for inspiration. We wait for confidence. We wait to feel ready. But readiness doesn't show up before the work. It shows up because of the work. Give yourself 90 days of intention and watch what happens. Your habits start to rewire, not overnight, but gradually, and then suddenly you wake up earlier, not because you have to, but because you want to. You start choosing things that align with who you're becoming, not who you've been. You stop negotiating with your excuses. You stop postponing your potential. And here's the secret no one tells you. It's not about changing everything. It's about changing one thing and sticking with it. Because when you change one thing with focus and consistency, it starts to influence everything else. Start walking every day, and you'll begin to eat better without even thinking about it. Start writing for 30 minutes a day, and suddenly you feel more creative, more clear-headed in meetings. Start putting your phone down at night, and within a few weeks, you're sleeping deeper, waking up with more energy, showing up for people differently. That's the compound effect. That's the beauty of a short focus season. You don't need to fix your whole life. You just need to get honest about one area, one commitment, and then do it every day without breaking the chain. 90 days is long enough to build a habit, to see results, to track progress. It's short enough to keep your brain engaged. You can see the finish line from the starting line. Not setting yourself up for burnout. You're giving yourself a deadline, a container for change. It becomes a promise you can keep. And when you keep it, day after day, week after week, you begin to become someone different. Not because you read a quote or listened to a podcast, but because you acted, you followed through. That's how confidence is built. Not by telling yourself you're strong, but by doing strong things. Not by visualizing success, but by becoming the kind of person who shows up even on the boring days, even on the tired days, even when it's not Instagram worthy. That's the kind of life you can build in 3 months. Will it be perfect? No. Will there be setbacks? Yes, but that's not the point. The point is that change is possible, and it's closer than you think. You don't need a decade, you need direction. You don't need a miracle, you need movement. You don't need to wait for January or Monday or tomorrow. You need to start today and let the next 90 days be proof of what's possible when a person decides, not just hopes, not just wants, not because it will be easy, but because you are ready. Not because you've got it all figured out, but because you're willing to figure it out along the way. Not because the calendar says so, but because your life says so. This is your season. Let it begin now. We live in a world obsessed with results. Everywhere you turn, there's a new hack, a shortcut, a shiny target to chase. Lose 10 pounds, make 6 figures, hit 1 million followers, buy the dream house, drive the dream car. And don't get me wrong, goals matter. Ambition is powerful. Progress is essential. But somewhere along the way, we started confusing goals with identity. And that's where things fall apart. Because here's the truth. Goals will give you direction, but they won't give you transformation. They're great for telling you where you want to go, but they say very little about who you're becoming along the way. And if you don't change who you are, you'll always default back to what you know, even if you reach the milestone. That's why so many people lose the weight and gain it back. Why they reach success but still feel empty. Why they cross the finish line only to feel more lost than when they started. They chased an outcome but never changed their operating system. If you want to change your life, you have to stop asking, what do I want to achieve? And start asking, who do I want to become? That shift is everything, because when your focus is on becoming rather than achieving, your motivation comes from a deeper place. You stop chasing temporary wins, you start aligning your actions with your values, and that's where consistency lives. Not in hype, not in pressure, but in identity. Let's break this down. Imagine someone who sets a goal to run a marathon. They write it on their calendar. They buy the shoes. They sign up for a training program. But every time the alarm goes off at 5 a.m., they're negotiating with themselves. Do I really have to run today? I'm not a morning person. I'm not a runner. That's their inner dialogue, because deep down their identity hasn't caught up with their ambition. Now compare that to someone who decides, I'm becoming a runner. The difference? That person laces up not because they're training for a race, but because it's who they are now. They run even when there's no race on the calendar. They run because it's part of their story. When behavior aligns with identity, effort becomes sustainable. It's no longer about willpower. It's about belonging. And human beings are wired to act in ways that are consistent with how they see themselves. That's why identity is so powerful. It becomes the filter through which all choices are made. So how do you change your identity? Not with affirmations, not with empty mantras or motivational wallpaper. You change identity through evidence. Every action you take is a vote for the kind of person you believe yourself to be. When you go to the gym, even for 20 minutes, you cast a vote for being someone who takes care of their body. When you write a paragraph every night, you cast a vote for being a writer. When you show up on time, when you listen fully, when you keep your promises, you are reinforcing a self-pigeon that says, this is who I am. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be consistent enough to let those votes count. And here's the most beautiful part. Identity isn't fixed. It's not something you're born with or locked into. It's not a personality test result or a label someone gave you in high school. Identity is built, it's chosen, it's reinforced every day through the small things. This is why the idea of 3 months of hard work is so transformative. Because 90 days of consistent, intentional action isn't just about reaching a goal, it's about proving to yourself that you're someone who shows up, that you're someone who follows through, that you're someone who finishes what they start, even if the results are still small, even if no one else notices yet, because you'll notice. And that internal shift, the one no one else can see but you can feel, that's the moment your life begins to pivot. You stop being the person who starts and quits. You stop being the person who hides behind, I'm just not that type of person. You stop telling yourself stories that no longer serve you, and you start writing a new one. That's what matters more than any number on a scale, any dollar amount in your account, or any trophy on your shelf. Who you become in the process of pursuing something, that's what you carry with you long after the finish line fades. So how do you build identity on purpose? It starts with vision. Not a vision of achievement, but a vision of self. Close your eyes and picture the person you want to be, not in terms of outcomes, but character. How do they think? How do they speak? How do they move through hard days? What do they believe about themselves? Now ask yourself, what would that version of me do today? Not next month, not when motivation returns, not when it's convenient, today. Because that's where identity is built. Not in big moments, but in ordinary ones. When you do the right thing, even when it's invisible. When you follow through, even when no one claps. When you make choices that align with your future, not your feelings. That's what 3 months of hard work really is. It's 3 months of identity stacking. It's 3 months of proving to yourself that you don't have to be who you used to be. That you can write a new story, one action at a time. And the crazy thing, once you become the person who does the thing, the results take care of themselves. You don't have to obsess over the outcome when your identity aligns with the behavior. You don't have to force motivation when your choices are rooted in who you are. You stop chasing results because the real reward becomes the trust you build with yourself. And trust, that's what changes everything. So don't just set goals, set standards. Don't just chase outcomes, chase integrity. Don't just hope to succeed. Decide who you'll be when no one's watching. Then be that. Over and over, quietly, consistently, until one day you wake up and realize you didn't just hit a goal, you became someone worth believing in. And that's a win that lasts. That discipline is a punishment. That showing up when you don't feel like it is some form of self-denial. That working hard is only for people trying to prove something to others. That structure, effort, and sacrifice are burdens to carry rather than choices to honor. And that somehow freedom means doing whatever we want whenever we want. But here's the truth. Discipline is not restriction. It's reverence. It's not about suffering, it's about self-respect. Think about someone you admire, someone who is grounded, focused, consistent. Maybe they're a leader, maybe they're a creator, maybe they're just the kind of person who walks into a room and makes you sit up a little straighter. That person didn't become who they are by accident. They became that way because they learned to keep promises to themselves. They showed up not once, not twice, but again and again and again. That's what discipline really is. It's not about being better than anyone else. It's not about control for the sake of control. It's about choosing every day to honor the person you are capable of becoming. That's why discipline isn't harsh, it's sacred, because when you commit to something and follow through, you're sending a message to yourself. You are worth the effort. You are worth the time. You are worth the work. Most people think discipline is about saying no, no to the cake, no to the party, no to the snooze button. But at its core, discipline is about saying yes. Yes to your growth. Yes to your future. Yes to a standard of living that reflects your values. It's a deeper yes, a longer yes, one that outlives the moment. That's why it's hard, because it's honest. Discipline asks you to do what's right over what's easy. And we live in a culture that glorifies ease, one that tells us follow your feelings is the highest form of self-love. But feelings change, standards last. When you decide to live with discipline, you're not denying your feelings, you're choosing to lead them. You're saying, I am not a servant to my mood, I'm the steward of my mission. That kind of mindset, that changes everything. Suddenly waking up early isn't a punishment, it's a privilege. It's time you've reclaimed to build something that matters. Going to the gym isn't a chore, it's an act of stewardship over a body that allows you to show up for life. Writing every day isn't a task, it's a declaration that your voice deserves space, even when it's not polished. This is what people miss when they view discipline as restriction. They don't see the freedom on the other side. Because when you train yourself to do the hard thing, you unlock the ability to handle anything. And that confidence, it doesn't come from external validation, it comes from internal alignment. Discipline doesn't just build results, it builds belief. And belief is what we're all really after. Belief that we're capable. Belief that we're enough. Belief that we have what it takes. You don't get that belief by consuming more content or reciting mantras into the mirror. You get it by earning your own respect, by doing the thing, by showing up when no one's watching, by choosing the long road because the short one never led anywhere worth going. And here's the kicker. Discipline isn't reserved for the motivated. Motivation is emotional. It's fleeting. It's tied to mood, weather, sleep, validation. Discipline isn't about waiting to feel good. It's about deciding to be someone who follows through even when it's inconvenient. And once that switch flips, once you stop needing everything to feel easy in order to act, you become unstoppable. Because now you don't need permission to grow. You don't need applause to persist. You don't need a mood swing to determine whether today counts. You've already decided it does. Not because the circumstances are perfect, but because you are committed. Discipline turns ordinary days into sacred ones. It turns morning routines into statements of purpose. It turns meals into fuel for a mission. It turns silence into clarity. It turns resistance into progress. That's the kind of person discipline creates. Not someone who's robotic, but someone who's real, someone who knows what matters to them and is willing to prove it through action, not once, but repeatedly. And that's where transformation really begins, not with information, but with implementation. We all know what we should do. The problem is never knowledge, it's follow through. And follow through, that's discipline. When you show up consistently, you're no longer someone with potential, you're someone living it. And the beautiful thing is, the more you show up, the easier it gets. Not because the task changes, but because you do. You become someone who doesn't second-guess themselves at every fork in the road. You become someone who trusts their own voice, not because it's perfect, but because it's proven. You become someone who isn't distracted by every shiny thing because they're too busy building something real. And when you live like that, when you carry discipline as an act of self-respect, you start to attract a different kind of life. Not one without obstacles, but one with purpose. Not one without pain, but one with meaning. Not one without effort, but one with reward. And maybe most importantly, you start to treat yourself differently. Because discipline teaches you to see yourself as someone worth investing in, someone worthy of effort, someone deserving of commitment, not just from others, but from yourself. You stop abandoning your own goals when they get uncomfortable. You stop lowering your standards to match your environment. You stop betraying your own potential because the world told you to settle. And you start rising, not because you're trying to prove anything, but because you believe in the version of you you're becoming. That's why 3 months of discipline can change your life. Not because you unlock some hidden superpower, but because you realize it was never hidden. It was waiting for you to act like you matter, for you to live like you're capable, for you to believe, not through words, but through your walk. Discipline is not the enemy of joy, it's the doorway to it. Because joy isn't found in comfort, it's found in clarity. Clarity about who you are, what you stand for, and the kind of life you're no longer willing to delay. There's this idea, subtle but powerful, that keeps so many people stuck. The belief that we need to feel ready before we begin. That before we step into the unknown, before we take the leap, before we make the call or hit send or walk into the room, we need to be completely prepared, perfectly polished, fully confident. But the truth is, that moment rarely, if ever, arrives. Most people never finish because they never start, not because they're lazy, not because they're unmotivated, but because they're waiting for a version of readiness that doesn't exist. They're waiting to stop feeling nervous. Waiting to be certain, waiting until they know exactly how it's going to play out. But readiness isn't something you feel, it's something you build, and the only way to build it is by moving. Progress doesn't wait for your permission. Life isn't on pause while you gather the courage. The world keeps spinning and time keeps moving. You can stand there preparing, planning, perfecting. Meanwhile, someone else is out there doing it scared, starting messy, failing forward, and by the time you feel ready, they're already 10 steps ahead, not because they had more talent, but because they didn't wait. Action beats perfection every single time. You don't grow into confidence, you grow through it. And confidence doesn't come from what you know, it comes from what you survive, from the stumbles, from the awkward beginnings, from the cringe moments that you later laugh about because you kept going. You don't have to be amazing to start. But you do have to start to be amazing, and sometimes that means showing up with shaky hands, a dry throat, and no clear plan, just a deep sense that you can't keep waiting for the perfect moment to arrive. Because here's the thing, perfection, it's often a mask, a disguise for fear. If you dig beneath it, what you'll usually find is not a desire to do your best, but a fear of being judged. A fear of being seen starting at the beginning, a fear of being vulnerable enough to be in progress. But being in progress is where growth lives. You don't get stronger without the resistance of the weight. You don't get wiser without walking through confusion. You don't get better without being a beginner. So many people spend years circling their calling, circling their dreams, circling their potential, because they're waiting for the day it finally feels easy. But no great thing ever began in certainty. It always started with someone willing to move despite the doubt. Someone who said, I don't know what I'm doing yet, but I know I care, I know this matters. And that's enough for me to begin. You don't need the full map, you just need the next step. That's how momentum is built. Not by seeing every turn ahead of time, but by trusting that you'll learn as you go. That if you keep your eyes open and your feet moving, you'll grow into the person who knows what to do next. Starting isn't about knowing everything. It's about trusting yourself enough to learn anything. You will never eliminate fear, but you can decide it won't control you. That's what finishing before you feel ready looks like. It's choosing courage over comfort. It's saying, this matters enough to do it while I'm still figuring it out. And the truth is, the longer you wait, the heavier the thing becomes. The more pressure builds. The more your brain tells you the story that now it really has to be perfect. But it doesn't. It has to be true. It has to be you. And often, that's what we're really scared of. Not failure, but exposure. We're scared to be seen trying, scared to be seen caring, scared to be seen not yet there. But there is something far worse than being seen trying, and that is never being seen at all. That is dying with your gifts still inside you. That is keeping your best ideas in the notebook, your real voice buried under filters, your true self locked in a closet labeled not quite ready. Don't do that. Don't wait another season to show up for your own life. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to decide. That's it. That's where momentum starts, with a decision backed by action, and then another, and then another. You're not behind, you're not too late, but you do have a choice right now to stop rehearsing the life you want and start living it. Start the project, make the call, have the conversation, publish the post, ask for the opportunity, take the class, launch the thing, say the words. And if your voice shakes, let it. If your first version is messy, good. If your hands sweat and your stomach flips, perfect. That's not weakness. That's evidence you're doing something that matters. People remember the finishers, but they also remember the starters, the ones who moved before the applause, who acted before the crowd gathered, who believed in something before the outcome was guaranteed. That can be you, but you have to get comfortable with the discomfort of being in motion. You have to fall in love with being bad before you're good. You have to choose the courage to look like a beginner, because everyone who's great at anything was once exactly where you are. It's not about proving anything to the world. It's about proving something to yourself, that you are no longer waiting to be chosen, that you are no longer waiting to feel enough, that you are no longer giving fear the final vote. You are choosing to begin imperfectly, to begin before you're ready, to begin now, because done is better than perfect, because motion beats meditation, because a real, messy, flawed version of you is more powerful than a perfect version of you that lives only in your imagination. You're allowed to be a work in progress and still take up space in the world. You're allowed to show up before the polish. You're allowed to move with shaky legs and an honest heart. In fact, the world needs more of that. We don't need more flawless performances. We need more authentic ones. We don't need more people playing safe. We need more people playing real. So here's the invitation. Don't wait until you feel ready. Start in the middle. Start unsure. Start with the fear in your chest and the doubt in your gut and the question in your mind. Start anyway. Because 3 months from now, you'll either look back and say, I'm so glad I started, or I wish I had. And the difference won't be your talent, your timing, or your tools. It'll be your decision to start, to keep going, to finish even when you didn't feel ready.